Welcome to the season premiere of the Debt-Free in 30 podcast. And yes, I know podcasts aren't like TV shows. They don't have seasons. There's one every week, all year long. But the first episode of this podcast aired on September 6, 2014, and I take a break every August to rebroadcast important episodes. So there is a natural break every summer, which is why I consider the first episode every September to be the start of a new season. So what can you expect this year in season number 9 of Debt-Free in 30? I thought about going full on social media where I just yell and scream all the time. You know, like on Twitter or Facebook. I think this guy's an idiot. I could just make fun of people, but not actually provide reasons why I disagree with someone and never provide constructive counterarguments or solutions. You know, like on Twitter or Facebook. But I've decided that no, that would not be very productive, so I'm going to take a different approach. This podcast doesn't have commercials or affiliate links or sponsors. That's not entirely true. This podcast takes effort to produce. We've got cameras and fancy microphones and Sean and Miriam behind the scenes who pull it all together. So the sponsor is Hoyes Versus Associates, Inc., the firm owned by Ted Michaelis and me. Obviously, one of the reasons we do this show is to promote our business. We talk about debt. If you have more debt than you can handle, we want you to call the Hoyes Michaelis helpline at 310-PLAN in Ontario, or go to our website at hoyes.com and it will explain your options, which may include a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, which is what we do. There you go. I just put a commercial right at the start of the podcast. I guess after 8 years, I'm finally getting the hang of this podcast thing. Yes, I want to promote my business, but I could take the time and money we devote to this podcast and just pay for more Google ads or radio commercials. But I want to do this podcast so that you can see that Ted and me and my other guests are real people who can help. But of course, there is a bigger objective with this show. My primary goal with the Debt-Free in 30 podcast is to give you sound, practical advice to make your everyday financial life a little easier. It's now about 2.5 years since the pandemic lockdown started. We thought 2 weeks to flatten the curve was unprecedented, and it was, but it seems that the pace of change in life has gotten even faster. Since the start of 2020, we've had record high home prices and then big drops in real estate values. We've had low interest rates and then much higher interest rates. Inflation was low, then it went way up. Gas prices were down, then up, then down, and I don't even know where they are today or where they're going. What's my point? Well, the strategies that used to work may not work anymore. Let me give you an example. For the last 10 or more years, the correct strategy here in Southern Ontario and most places in North America was to buy as big a house as you could afford with as big a mortgage as you could qualify for and hang on. Even if you overpaid for the house, if you just made the mortgage payments, no worries. The house is going up in value, so if you had a cash flow crunch, you could just sell the house and make lots of money. Nothing could go wrong. But the world has changed. If you bought a condo in Toronto or a house pretty much anywhere in Southern Ontario at the peak of the market in February, the price of your property may have dropped by 20% if you were to sell it now. Oh yeah, and interest rates are higher, way higher. So not only is the property worth less, but the interest payment you make each month on your mortgage may also be way up. So the strategy that worked great in 2019, where you bought any real estate and got as big a mortgage as you could and you couldn't lose, is now a horrible strategy. Perhaps that may change. Maybe interest rates will go down and real estate prices will go back up. I don't know. But my point is that the world is changing and you need to know what's going on so you can make informed decisions for you and your family. So this season on Debt-Free in 30, our focus will be on helping you deal with the changing economy. We'll discuss what you can do today to reduce debt, save money, and improve your financial well-being. Our shows in September and October will discuss what you can do if you run short on cash, what rising interest rates mean for callable debts like a line of credit or a HELOC, the best way to start tackling debt in this climate, and much more. My guests will include experts you recognize. Ted Michaelis, Scott Theriault, Maureen Parent, and we may have some new faces on the show this season as well. Some of the shows will be solo rants like today, but most shows will have guests so that you, the listener, get more than one perspective. The danger of me being the host of this fine broadcast is that I get to share my version of reality, which may not be the same as alternative versions of the truth. The problem is that the truth may only be obvious in hindsight. A lot of people were quite certain that real estate only went up because that's what it did for over a decade. Until it didn't. A lot of experts on the TV are quite certain that we're headed for hyperinflation. I disagree, which is why on this show I'll give you my perspective, I'll show my work, and then you can decide for yourself. I know the numbers. According to Statistics Canada in May 2020, the inflation rate in Canada as measured by the Consumer Price Index was below zero. It was almost negative 0.5%, but by June of this year, it was over 8%. That's an obvious trend, right? If in 2 years we go from less than zero to over 8%, it's logical to extrapolate and assume that by 2024, the inflation rate will be well over 16%, right? Maybe, but I don't think so. On the first Debt Free in 30 episode of 2022, episode 383, aired on New Year's Day, I predicted that the inflation rate in Canada would be down to around 2% by December 2022. It certainly looks like my prediction will be totally wrong, but we'll see. For the record, I still believe that inflation will be lower at the end of the year than it is now. And for you economists out there, I realize that high prices and inflation are not the same thing. Prices can go up when there are supply reductions. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. Perhaps we'll talk more about that on a future show. But my guess is that as prices go up, we buy less, so demand falls, and prices eventually fall. The cure for high prices is high prices. Unfortunately, I also believe we're already in a recession, and recessions lead to lower demand and lower prices. Will my predictions be accurate? Who knows, but we will continue to discuss issues like interest rates and inflation here on Debt Free in 30, and I'll share my reasoning, and I'll ask my guests what they think, and then you can take what we say and do your own research and form your own opinions. I think interest rates will peak this fall, and by the winter, they'll be lower. I could be wrong. But if I'm right, how does that change our behavior? If interest rates are going down, I guess it's a good idea to borrow more money, right? Well, that's what we Canadians have been doing for the last 10 or 20 years, which has fueled the rise in real estate prices and the stock market. But there's a catch. If interest rates are peaking and do start to fall, it may be because we're in a recession. And that may lead to lower real estate prices and a lower stock market and higher unemployment. Do you want to have debt if you're unemployed, even if interest rates are falling? No, you don't. And those are the types of issues we'll discuss from all sides so you can then make your own decisions. I think season number 9 will be entertaining and informative. I believe you should understand how money works. It's your money. You work hard for it, so you should understand it. That's why I do this show, but this podcast is not the only money resource out there. There are lots of other good podcasts and books and websites. We also have other Hoyes Michaelis resources. Every month we email out the Hoyes Michaelis Personal Finance newsletter to our clients and listeners of this show. Each month we do a deep dive on one area of personal finance to help you improve your financial literacy. The newsletter isn't about debt or bankruptcy. It's all about practical money management. We also have gift card giveaways each month as part of the newsletter to help you pay for the cost of groceries, gas, and other household items. The link is in the description, so you can sign up and join the tens of thousands of other Canadians who read it each month. It's free, and we'll never give your email to anyone else. We also have a professionals newsletter. Most of the subscribers to that newsletter are professionals like mortgage brokers and accountants and lawyers and members of the media. We release it monthly with our commentary on the updated bankruptcy statistics and other macroeconomic type information. Finally, last year we launched our first full-length course. The topic was how to rebuild your credit. It's entirely free with short, easy-to-follow videos. It'll help you rebuild and boost your credit without stress. You can find that at courses.hoyes.com, and the link is also in the video description. I know things are moving quickly, and it's hard to keep track. I get it. It's hard to know what your next financial move should be when everything is so unstable. That's why I do this podcast, to help you, the listener, make good decisions by being well informed about the big picture. That's our show for today. We release a new episode every Saturday morning, so please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. Most of our listeners listen to the audio version of this podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any major podcasting app. Just search for Debt Free in 30. One final note. My guest back on episode 125 that aired 5.5 years ago was my father-in-law, Bob Lasseline. The episode's title was How One Man Retired Debt-Free at Age 48. That episode was so popular, I rebroadcast it that summer. Bob died last month at the age of 86. I'll miss him. Bob listened to the podcast. Every Saturday morning, my wife would email him the link to the YouTube version of the podcast, and he'd listen to it. And there were more than a few times where he'd be talking to my wife on the phone, and he'd ask to speak to me, and he'd quote back to me something we discussed on the show. His favorite guest was Ted, and I think his favorite topic was whenever we talked about cars. He wasn't a car guy like Ted. He grew up on a farm near Windsor, so he was a tractor guy. Specifically, he was an Oliver tractor guy, which was the make of tractor he grew up with that is no longer in production, and he owned a few vintage models. A few years ago, he and his wife, my mother-in-law, moved from his 11-acre farm to a place in town, and he didn't have space for all of his Oliver memorabilia, and he was going to throw out his Oliver clock, so I asked him if I could have it. He said sure, and that clock has been hanging on the wall of the DFI30 studio ever since. You can see it on every show right over Ted's shoulder. He was a good man. Of course, I may be biased because I married his daughter, and he was always good to me, and he listened to this show. Bob is no longer physically with us, but every time I'm doing a podcast and I look over Ted's shoulder to see how we're doing on time, I'll see his Oliver tractor clock and I'll remember a good man. Thanks for listening and watching. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.